The Shadow Within. Understanding Jung's Anima and its Unconscious. Control Michael stared at the text message on his phone for the 5th time that morning. I need space to figure things out. Another relationship had ended, the same way they all did, with him feeling confused, desperate, and somehow responsible for everything that went wrong. At 35, he was successful, intelligent, and genuinely caring, yet he couldn't understand why every woman he dated eventually pulled away, leaving him feeling like he'd lost himself in the process. What Michael didn't realize was that he was being controlled by something Carl Jung identified over a century ago, a psychological force so powerful it can completely hijack a man's identity without him ever becoming conscious of its influence. Jung called this force the Anima, the unconscious feminine aspect that exists within every man's psyche. But what most people don't understand about Jung's concept is that the Anima isn't simply a benign psychological component. When left unconscious and unintegrated, it becomes a destructive force that can control every aspect of a man's relationships, career decisions, and sense of self-worth in ways that are both subtle and devastating. The Anima operates like a psychological puppet master, pulling strings that most men never see. It creates intense emotional reactions, irrational behaviors, and compulsive patterns that seem to come from nowhere. Men find themselves making decisions they don't understand, pursuing women who are wrong for them, and losing their sense of identity in relationships without ever recognizing that they're being controlled by an unconscious psychological complex. Have you ever found yourself completely changing who you are when you're attracted to someone, as if some invisible force is reshaping your personality without your permission? Michael's pattern was heartbreakingly predictable, though he couldn't see it. Every time he met a woman he was attracted to, something inside him would activate, a desperate need to become whatever he thought she wanted him to be. If she seemed intellectual, he would emphasize his academic achievements. If she appeared free-spirited, he would suddenly become spontaneous and adventurous. If she valued emotional sensitivity, he would become almost therapeutically available. This wasn't conscious manipulation or strategy. It was something far more primitive and unconscious. Michael was being possessed by what Jung called Anima projection, where a man unconsciously projects his idealized feminine qualities onto a woman and then becomes psychologically dependent on her to feel complete. The woman becomes a screen onto which he projects all his unlived emotional potentials, and her approval becomes essential for his psychological survival. Jung understood that every man carries within his unconscious psyche an image of the eternal, feminine, not just any woman, but the perfect woman who embodies all the emotional, intuitive, and nurturing qualities he has learned to suppress in himself. This Anima figure becomes incredibly powerful, precisely because it represents everything he believes he lacks and desperately needs to feel whole. The tragic irony is that the more a man projects his Anima onto real women, the more he loses touch with his own authentic self. He becomes psychologically dependent on external feminine approval to access his own emotional life, creativity, and intuition. Without realizing it, he has given away his psychological autonomy to an unconscious complex that promises completion but delivers only deeper fragmentation. Michael's relationships followed the same devastating pattern because his Anima was choosing his partners for him. He wasn't attracted to women based on compatibility, shared values, or genuine connection. He was attracted to women who matched his unconscious Anima projection. The more perfectly a woman seemed to embody his idealized feminine image, the more powerfully he was drawn to her, regardless of whether she was actually suitable for a real relationship. This created what Jung called Anima fascination, an intense, almost magical attraction that feels like destiny but is actually psychological possession. Michael would meet a woman who triggered his Anima projection and immediately feel like he had found the one. His rational mind would shut down, his personal boundaries would dissolve, and he would begin the unconscious process of trying to merge with this idealized feminine figure. The Anima doesn't just control who men are attracted to, it controls how they behave in relationships. When possessed by the Anima, Men become moody, irrational, and emotionally volatile in ways that seem completely out of character. They develop what Jung called Anima moods, sudden emotional states that feel overwhelming and uncontrollable, often triggered by perceived rejection or disappointment from the woman onto whom they've projected their anima. Michael experienced these anima moods as inexplicable emotional storms that would arise whenever his partner seemed distant, critical, or unavailable. He would find himself feeling devastated by minor interactions, interpreting neutral comments as rejection, and desperately seeking reassurance in ways that pushed his partners further away. He had no idea that these reactions weren't coming from his conscious self, but from an unconscious complex that felt existentially threatened whenever the anima projection was disrupted. Can you recall moments when your emotional reactions to someone seemed completely disproportionate to what actually happened, as if some deeper part of you was responding to a threat you couldn't consciously identify? Jung's most disturbing insight about the anima was that it operates through what he called psychological possession. When a man is possessed by his anima, he literally becomes a different person, not his authentic self, but a character created by his unconscious to maintain the anima projection. This possessed self is often charming, sensitive, and emotionally available in ways that feel forced and unsustainable. Michael's friends often commented on how different he became when he was dating someone new. The confident, decisive man they knew would transform into someone anxious, people-pleasing, and emotionally dependent. This wasn't conscious behavior change. It was anima possession taking over his personality to serve the unconscious goal of maintaining connection with the projected feminine ideal. The anima creates what Jung called emotional infections, states where a man becomes completely overwhelmed by emotions that don't actually belong to him, but to the anima complex. He might find himself crying inexplicably, feeling desperately lonely when alone, or experiencing intense romantic yearning that has nothing to do with the actual woman in his life and everything to do with the archetypal feminine figure he's projecting onto her. These emotional infections explain why men often feel like they're losing themselves in relationships. They literally are losing themselves. Their authentic personality is being suppressed by anima possession, which creates a false self designed to maintain psychological fusion with the idealized feminine. The more possessed they become, the more their real identity disappears beneath the anima's emotional demands. Jung discovered that the anima operates through what he called contamination, the unconscious mixing of the personal and the archetypal. When Michael looked at a woman he was attracted to, he wasn't just seeing her as an individual, he was seeing her contaminated by his anima projection, which made her appear to possess magical qualities she didn't actually have. This contamination made rational evaluation impossible and realistic relationship building nearly hopeless. The most insidious aspect of anima control is that it feels like love. Men possessed by their anima genuinely believe they are experiencing the deepest, most meaningful connection possible when they are actually trapped in a psychological prison of projection and dependency. The intensity of anima-driven attraction is so powerful that it convinces men they have found something real and precious when they have actually found something that will ultimately destroy their capacity for authentic relationship. Michael's serial disappointments in love weren't caused by bad luck or wrong women. They were caused by his unconscious anima complex choosing partners based on projection rather than reality. Every woman he dated was doomed to disappoint him because no real person could live up to the archetypal perfection of his anima projection. The women inevitably revealed their human limitations, which shattered the projection and left Michael feeling betrayed and abandoned. Jung understood that anima possession creates a vicious cycle. The more a man projects his anima onto women, the more dependent he becomes on their approval for his psychological well-being. This dependency makes him increasingly unattractive to the very women he's trying to connect with, because they can sense his neediness and lack of authentic self-possession. His desperation to maintain the anima projection pushes away the women he's trying to hold on to. The anima also controls men through what Jung called anima opinions, sudden, irrational judgments and beliefs that seem to come from nowhere but feel absolutely certain. Michael would find himself having strong opinions about relationships, women, and emotional matters that didn't align with his conscious values, but felt unquestionably true when he was in an anima state. These opinions often led him to make poor decisions and say things he later regretted. Have you ever noticed how your beliefs about love and relationships seem to change dramatically, depending on your emotional state, as if different parts of your psyche have completely different philosophies about what relationships should be? The dark power of the anima is that it promises what every man secretly wants: access to the emotional, intuitive, and creative aspects of himself that he has learned to suppress. But it delivers this access only through dependency on external women. Instead of developing his own emotional intelligence and creative capabilities, the anima-possessed man becomes psychologically parasitic, needing women to feel emotionally alive and complete. Jung's most profound insight was that the anima becomes destructive precisely because it represents unlived aspects of a man's own personality. Every quality he admires in women and projects onto them through anima fascination is actually a quality that exists within his own psyche, but has been repressed or undeveloped. The anima's control comes from his unconscious belief that he can only access these qualities through relationship with women rather than through internal development. Michael's transformation began when he started recognizing the signs of anima possession in his own behavior. He learned to identify the emotional infections, the irrational moods, the desperate need for feminine approval, and the loss of personal identity that characterized his anima states. This recognition didn't eliminate the anima's influence, but it began to reduce its unconscious control over his decisions and reactions. The process of breaking free from anima control requires what Jung called anima integration, the conscious development of the emotional, intuitive, and creative qualities that the anima represents. Instead of seeking these qualities through projection onto women, a man must learn to cultivate them within himself. This is difficult work because it requires confronting the cultural conditioning that taught him to suppress these aspects of his personality. Jung discovered that men who successfully integrate their anima become dramatically more attractive to women because they no longer need women to feel complete. They can offer genuine partnership rather than unconscious dependency. They become emotionally self-sufficient while remaining open to deep connection. They stop projecting idealized images onto women and start seeing them as complete individuals, worthy of authentic relationship. Michael's dating life transformed as he learned to recognize and withdraw his anima projections. Instead of being overwhelmed by magical attraction to women who matched his archetypal image, he began evaluating potential partners based on character, compatibility, and genuine connection. He stopped losing himself in relationships because he had developed a stronger sense of his own identity that couldn't be possessed by unconscious complexes. The anima's control over modern men has become particularly dangerous in our current cultural moment because traditional masculine roles have been disrupted without being replaced by healthy alternatives. Many men are unconsciously turning to anima projection as a way to access emotional meaning and purpose, making them vulnerable to psychological possession and manipulation by anyone who can activate their anima fantasies. Jung warned that anima possession could destroy a man's capacity for authentic relationship, creative work, and personal development. When the anima is unconscious and projected, it drains psychological energy that should be used for growth and achievement. Men become addicted to the emotional highs of anima attraction instead of building the internal resources necessary for sustained success and satisfaction. The integration of the anima requires learning to carry the tension between masculine and feminine psychological qualities within oneself, rather than seeking completion through external relationships. This doesn't mean becoming feminine. It means becoming psychologically whole by developing the full range of human capacities rather than splitting them between self and other, masculine and feminine, internal and external. Subscribe to this channel if you recognize the patterns of anima possession in your own life and want to learn how to break free from unconscious psychological control. Like this video if you believe that true masculine strength comes from psychological integration rather than emotional dependency. Share this with men who need to understand that their relationship struggles might be caused by unconscious forces they've never learned to recognize. Michael's journey from anima possession to integration took years of conscious work, but the results transformed every aspect of his life. His relationships became more satisfying because they were based on genuine connection rather than projection. His career advanced because he was no longer distracted by constant emotional drama and anima moods. His creativity flourished because he had direct access to the intuitive and emotional intelligence he had previously sought through women. Jung's warning about the anima's dark side wasn't meant to demonize the feminine or discourage relationships with women. It was meant to help men recognize when they are being controlled by unconscious psychological forces that prevent authentic connection and personal development. The anima becomes dark only when it remains unconscious and projected. When integrated consciously, it becomes a source of wisdom, creativity, and genuine emotional intelligence. The men who successfully integrate their anima discover that they no longer need to be controlled by desperate attraction, emotional dependency, or the constant search for the perfect woman who will make them feel complete. They become attractive to others because they are complete within themselves, while remaining open to genuine partnership and mutual growth. The dark side of Jung's anima reveals itself most clearly in the epidemic of men who have lost their sense of identity and purpose in relationships, who make decisions based on female approval rather than personal values, and who experience devastating emotional collapse when romantic relationships end. These men have unknowingly surrendered their psychological autonomy to an unconscious complex that promises fulfillment but delivers only deeper fragmentation. Your own struggles with relationships, emotional volatility, and loss of identity may be signs that you are being controlled by unconscious anima projection, rather than choosing partners and behaviors from a place of conscious awareness. The path to freedom requires the courage to recognize these patterns and the commitment to develop the emotional and creative capacities that you have been seeking through others. Jung's insights about anima possession remain as relevant today as they were a century ago because they address fundamental aspects of human psychology that don't change with cultural trends or technological advancement. The anima will continue to control men until they learn to recognize its influence and take responsibility for their own psychological integration and emotional development. The choice between anima possession and anima integration determines whether a man will spend his life seeking completion through others or developing the internal resources necessary for authentic relationship and personal fulfillment. This choice cannot be made unconsciously. It requires the willingness to examine one's deepest psychological patterns and the courage to develop capacities that society may not have encouraged, but that are essential for psychological wholeness.